All right, David, you ready to go?
In theory.
All right. So, good morning, everybody. I want to thank you. My name is Mike Burke. I am the Executive Director for the Pennsylvania School Bus Association. I'm joined on the line by Moira McNally, who is our Member Services Coordinator, and of course our presenter today, David Leng. David is a repeat offender with PSBA. He has been on He's done a webinar for us before. He's been a presenter at our convention. For those of you who don't know, David is the author of a couple of international bestsellers, The Law of Insurance Attraction, which is interesting, title, Turning Premiums into Profits, as well as one of the top-selling books on workers' compensation for employees, which is titled Stop Being Frustrated and Overcharged. David is the Vice President and Managing Partner of the Duncan Financial Group, which is a partner with Keystone, and Lori Simpson is on the line with us too. And Lori, we thank you. You made this connection for us last year, so thank you for that, Lori. David is the Vice President, like I said, Managing Partner at Duncan Financial Group. He is also a faculty member of the Institute of WorkComp Professionals and a contributing fellow at the Workers' Compensation Institute. Since 2004, he has saved clients well over $50 million in premiums and overcharges. David has written articles for industry magazines and has performed programs across the U.S. for associations and business groups, as I said, including our own. So enough about that. Let's get to the professional here. And I'd like to welcome David Leng to PSBA. David, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mike.
Wait a minute. I forgot one thing. Wait a minute. Sorry. We will be taking questions during the presentation. If you have any questions, you can submit them. I think the best way, David, is like we did last time. You can submit them using the question. Using the question or chat box. And then we'll be happy to I'll be monitoring those, and we'll be forwarding those over to David throughout the webinar. So now, David, it's all yours.
Okay, not a problem. No, I appreciate you asking me and inviting me to do this. As you can tell, I do enjoy it. I will try to keep this to a 3-hour tour like we talked about. Just kidding. Try to keep it under the hour like we talked about. We talked about, make sure if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. The difficult ones, I'll ignore. The easy ones, I will answer. But let's dig into this. Obviously, workers' compensation is rather frustrating to most business owners because it is a large line item on their expense report. Plus, you also get into the emotional side when you know you have an employee, let's say, taking advantage of you or the situation with regard to workers' compensation. So what we are going to outline today is a better understanding actually how workers' compensation works and what you can actually do to try to reduce your costs. A lot of times when business owners want to look at dealing with their workers' compensation, they go out and do bidding and quoting. But believe it or not, that actually has little to do with the ultimate cost of workers' compensation. You may get a lower price for that year, but as Phil says, how's that work for you? Has bidding and quoting affected your workers' compensation audits and experience modifiers and confirmed that they're correct? Helped an injured employee get back to work quicker, made you more attractive to insurance companies, and really, like we talked about, truly slash your insurance costs. So ultimately, what we're going to try to go through today, and hopefully you get a takeaway of at least 3 things that will help you slash your premiums and address workers' compensation more effectively. If you drop me an email, this is the one for my website as an author and speaker, I will gladly give you resources. If you put anything else in there that I may mention during the webinar that you would like to see, just go ahead and drop me an email and we'll get that out to you. So let's start. The most businesses, when they experience workers' compensation, it's, other than claims, it's that renewal time where about 60, 90, 120 days prior to renewal, business owners tell me they're inundated with calls from agents trying to quote their insurance. The typical process may be to go get several agents, to go to several markets, And because particularly in the school bus industry, there's only a handful of workers' compensation companies that do a really good job. The agents argue over broker of record letters, state they have a great relationship, and they all say, hey, we can get you the best deal. Who do you select? And are you ultimately paying the least for your workers' compensation? Many business owners tell me that after they go through this process, they still feel like they're paying too much. Why is that? And that's also one of the reasons why I say this process is kind of broken. The insurance industry has taught people to go out and get quotes, and this is how you choose your insurance. But in reality, as you'll see, this really doesn't work very well. It's not necessarily effective. So with that, the problem becomes is the insurance agents are doing exactly what they're calling you for. They're calling you to say, here's an insurance company, here's the rate, and that's what they're focused on doing for you. I had once had a business owner we were consulting for tell me that he had 6 agents in their insurance companies come in and present to them, him, his CFO, and his HR manager, and basically said when it was all said and done, they each talked about how wonderful insurance company was, how they each had the best loss control in the marketplace, how they each had the best claim services around. Now, interestingly enough, he had been with 4 insurance companies in the prior 7 years. Those 4 were in the group of the 6 that presented. Now, I won't use the same language he did, but basically he told me they were all the same. None of them did anything different. In the end, he had basically a so-so program, and he really was still feeling overcharged. But as I've gone around the country speaking to business owners, this isn't the only frustration that they shared with me about the insurance industry. So, So at this point, I want to give you a little bit of an understanding as to how this all came about and why this makes a difference. 4 months, which was out of college, which was, let's say more than 20 years ago, I was pulling into a manufacturing plant. At the time, I had actually was working with companies as an outsourced risk manager to help them manage their risks, reduce their costs, things like that. And I pulled into this prospective business, and they're a manufacturing facility. And when you go to a manufacturing facility, particularly a stamping plant, you hear a lot of loud noises. People have to wear earplugs, things like that. Well, when I pulled in the lot, all you saw was the ambulance, the police, fire department, and when I got out of my car, it was the squawking of the EMS radios. It turned out an employee had actually been killed. Now, I got to know, how it happened, what happened, and today they're actually still a client of mine. But I also learned how little workers' compensation actually did. The gentleman that had passed away was a father of 2, leaving the mother, who was a part-time employee in the front office of this plant, with 2 kids under the age of 3. He was one of the best friends of the owner. They had grown up together. So I saw the effect not just on the family, but also on the employer, on the coworkers, and ultimately, my quest became to try to get everybody to go home the same way they showed up. And we were able to, do that, get in, understand how injuries were occurring, how to prevent them, so that people would go home safe. But even as we did that, and there was less claims, premiums go down for our clients, they still came back and said, we still are facing some issues that don't make sense to us with regards to workers' compensation. And that's why we, to really help our clients to reduce their premiums, we dig in and focus on the things that actually impact their premium. It's not just the claims. And we'll go through a bit of this. So out of the gate, and if we ever want to do it, we find in the Institute of WorkComp Professionals finds almost 75% of premium audits at the end of the year are actually incorrect. That subject in and of itself can be a complete separate webinar. It's not as prevalent with our school bus contractors because predominantly almost everybody goes in the governing class. But if anybody would want a copy of the Audit Check Work program, like I said, just email me and we would send that to you. and that would help you build an error-free workers' compensation audit. So one of the biggest sources of frustration business owners tell me, and one of the biggest drivers of your premium, is your experience modifier. Now, I don't know how many have ever seen an experience modifier worksheet. I guess you could say redacted the name of the business and altered some of the stuff at the top so you can't figure out who it is. But as you can see, the Pennsylvania Compensation Rating Bureau bases the experience modifier on 3 years. They got 3 years of audited payroll, and they calculate at the bottom, as you can see, expected losses, how much they expect in claims for you to have over those 3 years. That's at the bottom. At the top, they have your actual losses. And when it's all said and done, they compare you to your peers and determine, are you better or worse than your peers? And because of that, you get a credit or a surcharge. So basically, it's a lot of actuarial math. As you can also see, claims are capped at $42,500 right up here. So it's trying to weight and drive frequency. So this is a bunch of actuarial that we're not going to get into. You know, I kind of wonder if Einstein would even understand it, but the gist of it is every dollar that the insurance company spends on your behalf has an impact on your experience modifier, and every point, as you know, on your experience modifier that goes up will also impact your workers' compensation premium. So understanding the experience modifier, comparing to your peers, now you all transport children to be educated. So what grade would those students bring home if they were average or met expectations? Of course, that is a 1.0 experience modifier would be a C, average. So how many of those parents do you think are happy their child brought home a C? Now, I know that probably depends on which child they are talking about, but you get the point. Everybody wants to be better and get, in essence, their credit. Now, what's also a little confusing is a lot of employers say, hey, wait a minute, I paid in, I'm just going to pick a number, $100,000 in premium, and the insurance company spent $50,000 in claims. They got more money than I paid them, but yet my premium went up. So the question becomes, what loss ratio? That's that amount of money the insurance company spends, the amount of money that the insurance company takes from you, drives would get you to a 1.0 experience modifier. Most employers would say it's 100% or 50% like I had in my example. But in reality, it's closer to 30%. So in reality, if this school bus contractor had $30,000 in losses, that's about where they would be if they had for a 1.0. The reason being is when I talked about the $42,500 cap in Pennsylvania, and the calculation changes in other states, but every claim over that still is paid by the insurance company. In fact, workers' compensation is unlimited. I've seen injuries that go into the millions of dollars. But from an experience modifier standpoint, it only calculates those smaller, more frequent claims, and that's why it's a lower loss ratio. So in essence, we talked about it. You are now paying for your claims mathematically. Dollar of a claim increases your modifier, increases your premium. So some of the things that I recommend employers look at is that they understand when the experience modifier gets calculated. The most important date of your policy year is not your renewal date. We call it I used to refer to it as the Kodak moment, the date that the insurance company sends the data to the rating bureau to calculate your experience modifier. But I did a workshop and someone raised their hand and said, who's Kodak? So now we call it the selfie moment. What date did your company smile at the camera and send it off to the rating bureau? That's the middle of your policy year, 6 months in or 6 months prior to renewal, either way. They get the information, and if that information is incorrect, guess what happens to your experience modifier? And once it's sent, it's pretty much etched in stone for most cases. So you want to understand what your data looks like. And in reality, when they send the information in, they're sending in not just the claims that they paid, but they're also sending in what they call reserves. So paid losses, according to the industry, is paid and reserve, not just what they actually cut checks for. Okay. So when you look at it, the things you want to understand are, first off, we find 10% of experience modifiers are incorrect when they're calculated. And because of how the claims are managed and how reserves are set, we find 90% can be mismanaged. So you have to have a process to really understand your claims throughout the course of the year. So there's also 3 critical analyses that I recommend every employer get with regards to their workers' compensation every year. The first one is, how low can your experience modifier go? In other words, if you had 0 claims, what would be that mathematical value of your experience modifier would be if you had 0 claims? The reason why I point that out is, if, let's say, a lot of insurance agents would say, hey, wait a minute, you got a 0.9 experience modifier. You're a great risk for the insurance company. You're getting a 10% credit. Is that an A? Or can your experience modifier, because of your size, maybe be a 0.7, 0.6, or maybe even in the 0.5s? So in reality, that's no longer an A. That might be a B or even a C. So you need to benchmark your results, and that's the first one you could look at, is saying, how low could it go? Because every dollar and point over that minimum is more money out of your pocket. The second number is the difference in premium from what you're paying today and what your minimum experience modifier is. That tells you this year you're paying X amount of money back to the insurance company for those claims that you had in those 3 years. But you also want to know the ultimate cost of an injury. As we talked about, an injury affects your experience modifier for 3 years. So what does $1 claim cost over the 3 years? You'd be surprised to know, most likely, for most employers, you're going to repay the insurance company that dollar plus some interest, depending upon your size, depending upon your rates. You know, it may be several percentage points to, you may be paying 40 or 50% more than what the insurance company paid out. So understanding the cost drivers of the experience modifier and the impact on your premium is important to know, because ultimately that helps guide your decisions as to how you should or could manage your claims, your safety, and things like that. So it's a good idea to benchmark. And lastly, I won't touch on it here, but when you change ownership or even change your date of renewal, that can also impact your experience modifier. So we talked about workers' compensation pays for the medical and wages of your injured employee. But workers' compensation does not cover a lot of other things that do affect your bottom line. Obviously, if there's an injury, somebody has to investigate it. Your safety committee may be discussing it, reviewing it. You may have to rehire somebody or to replace that person. You may have your bus damaged. You may have equipment in the shop if it's one of your maintenance or mechanics. There's a lot of things that you as an employer have to pay that are not covered by workers' compensation. And depending upon studies, a lot of times they say for every dollar that is spent on the injury, between the increase in premium and all the other things that are not covered by workers' comp, an employer will pay somewhere around $2 to $5. So obviously, controlling the number of claims that you have and the size of the claims is very important. We talked about the criteria. If you want to have your experience modifier analyzed and get your first benchmark so you can kind of see that, just let me know in an email, or you could even go to the website, fill it out, and we can take care of that for you. If you're in the Keystone School Bus Association Workers' Compensation Program, we will be giving that information to your agent to help deliver that information to you so you could understand the actual cost of your experience modifier. Okay. So the takeaways from understanding experience modifier. Now, I know that's a lot of information at a very high level. I mean, I could probably do a 2-hour class just on getting into the nuances of an experience modifier, but at a high level, it's the important thing to understand is workers' compensation is the most controllable form of insurance that you have because you're paying for your losses. So in other words, if you want to reduce your premiums, you should reduce your claim costs. And this is where I sometimes get some business owners say, I don't get it, but if you treat your workers' compensation as commodity, meaning all you do is you shop it and you change it whenever you don't like the premium and so forth, I've seen many times when an employer changes from one company to another because of the premium, but maybe that company isn't as strong on the claim service, isn't as strong on the safety services, and because of it, maybe they accept a claim that they shouldn't have, and now you're going to pay for it. Or maybe they let somebody linger out on, at home rather than bringing them back to work. Maybe they chose their doctors based on a fee reduction versus the quality of medical service. So that's why you have to pay attention to how your workers' compensation processes are managed. Once again, your losses that are used in the experience modifier, your paid and reserves. You do want to verify that your modifier is correct, but ultimately, the last thing I want to touch on is subrogation. Being in the transportation industry, there's always the possibility that a driver could be injured by another operator of a vehicle. In that case, there is the opportunity that there might be a recovery of funds or subrogation from the driver that caused the accident. Under Act 6 of 1990, the Auto Reform Act, under Governor Casey, we cannot subrogate directly workers' compensation to the driver that hit your bus or your van, but if the injured employee sues, we can attach that and recover some or all of what the workers' compensation paid. So if that happens, it's important to make sure that the Bureau knows and that information is transmitted to the Rating Bureau, because the Rating Bureau will recalculate your experience modifier retroactively up to 4 years. So that would, in essence, potentially return all those surcharges that occurred from a claim that, was paid and now recovered, so that you get money back. So something to pay attention to when somebody else hits and injures one of your drivers. So the next thing we're going to dig into is a little bit relating to the insurance companies' insurance rates and things like that. In Pennsylvania, has several safety programs. I know a lot of school bus operators have a certified safety committee where you get a 5% credit. Some do have deductible programs that I spoke to. And the one thing I also want to go through is you've probably seen a schedule rating unit, whether it be Pennsylvania allows a 25% credit or surcharge depending upon certain criteria. And this is a subjective amount. That's the key you have to understand. And it's based on an underwriter's perception of your risk profile. And we'll dig in a little bit more what that means. But ultimately, this is right out of the rating manual for the state of Pennsylvania. They will look at it and say, based on the quality of your safety, maybe training of your employees, the physicians that you have in the area, they can provide scheduled credits or surcharges to affect your premium. So it's important to know and convey to your underwriters what exactly would be a positive that would actually help you get additional credits. And we'll talk more about this. So here's those guys again, and ladies that come in and try to quote your insurance. I have often asked business owners, how much time do you think that these agents spend on, getting options for you, getting the insurance for you? What do the submissions look like? Have you ever actually seen a submission? the insurance company typically looks at a workers' compensation declaration, or not declaration, sorry, an application, which pretty much gives.
Are you having problems hearing me? Or am I coming? Is it just on my receiving end? I wonder.
It might be on your receiving end. You're clear for me.
Okay. All right. Good. Then I won't get all paranoid about it. David, you there?
When I went to dial back in, it gave me a hard time dialing back in.
All right, you're on. Apparently, the issue is on my IP, my voice over IP. So you're good to go. I'm sorry. I just
there you go.
I'm sorry.
Giving me a hard time, make me do extra work. I tell you.
I know. I'm gonna pay for this. I know.
Yeah,
All right, man.
Okay. Now I don't remember where I started.
Myself.
I'm just going home. I forgot where I left off. Okay. So where did I leave off? I was talking about the application. So there's a standard industry accord application that has your information and addresses. It has a payroll by classification and number of employees. And then it has a bunch of yes-no questions, that most of which, if you answer yes, is not a good thing. And then they add their loss runs, and they go out and try to get quotes. So the question I always ask is, how well do they actually position you in the insurance marketplace? So I got to get that off the screen there too. There we go. So in reality, I keep asking, does bidding and quoting your insurance really stop those feelings of being overcharged? Do they stop mismanaging of claims? Hiring somebody that's going to become a claim, and getting an employee that does something stupid. In fact, if because of computers, insurance companies have indefinite memory. If you bid your insurance too frequently, and we'll talk about this in a moment, you actually score worse with the insurance company, in which case that can actually make you less attractive or cause them to have higher rates or even walk away from offering to even quote your insurance. So this is what some of the insurance companies look like. I don't know how many of you ever seen the movie Moneyball. It's about I guess it was the Oakland A's, the Athletics, and how with some of the lowest payroll in baseball, year after year, they were making the playoffs. And they were doing analytics rather than having a scout that looked at, how smooth somebody's swing was, looked like they had a strong arm, that they were a powerful batter. They looked at statistics, how quickly did they get on, how often they get on base, their fielding errors, things like that. And basically sliced and diced data to come up with a team that made the playoffs. So insurance companies kind of do the same things, but with a lot more information than you probably realize. So one of the things is, if you've been with 3 or more insurance companies in 5 years, they know it. They can see it on the loss runs. It's public information on the Department of Labor website. Another problem is if they receive multiple submissions from 2 different agents or 3 different agents and the information is different, they're going to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? And may choose to walk away. If they have no clear underwriting information as to the quality of what you do, it becomes a problem. So that has an effect on your premium. So your premium, if you really think about it at a base level, it's your payroll times which we already talked about briefly, can be wrong, the experience modifier, which can be wrong or mismanaged, and the rate that an insurance company offers. So one of the things that is a variable, once again, is that rate. And that rate is based on your risk profile. An underwriter's perception of your risk. If they view you as a higher risk, they're less likely to give you a good rate or not quote your insurance. That's also one of the reasons why there's only a handful of insurance companies that do a good job with regards to school transportation, because there is a risk associated with driving on the road. It's no different than a delivery service, but less risky than, let's say, a long-haul trucking operation. But there is a risk for things like auto accidents. So we recommend that you engage in a risk management process, and that really is getting to be the identification, analyzing, controlling risks, and making sure that you're trying to, doing those 3 steps, make yourself more attractive to insurance companies. Step 4, finance risk, which is where you do the risk transfer, which is also called insurance. And then you measure and refine and start the process over and over. The problem is most insurance agents, they really start at step 4 because they earn a commission for placing your policy. And I know talking to employers around the country, a couple have said they finally got to a point where they realized that just because they get a bunch of calls from insurance agents, they used to think that meant they were really attractive to the insurance industry. What they begin to realize, they were just attractive to the insurance agents because they're getting a commission. They had to change to become more attractive to the insurance companies, which when you made the comment, it was an interesting title, The Laws of Insurance Attraction. That's basically the basis of it. So ultimately, a lot of times the agent starts here, and then they come back and say, hey, we can offer some risk services or safety person or something, or we have this website full of resources that you can use. But if they start in the finance and promise to do these things, how do you really know they're going to deliver results for you? How do you know they're going to help you do this? So I always like to say you need to have a clear plan. You have to have the process of identifying what the risks are. We call it an assessment. And then you figure out, what do we need to do as a business plan to help a business become better, become more attractive to the insurance company. And that's where over the course of the year, you pick off things and you work and achieve and improve operations, which come insurance pricing time, you now have leverage to say to insurance companies, we're a better risk today than we were last year, therefore we deserve and can earn better rates. Now, the way to look at it is, I guess you could say the question I have at the bottom is, when's the best time to start a risk management process? The only answer I could think of is it's 10:40 this morning, so that's a good time. But obviously, it's not a couple weeks before your renewal date. You want to start this process well before the renewal, so you have some data and some information to provide the insurance company. So if you're an underwriter and you receive a submission from an agent that just says, here's an application, here's loss runs, and that's it, which approach do you think an underwriter is going to give, better or more preferential treatments and rates to? One that just looks and prices or insurance, or one that is actively engaged in trying to become a better operation? And I know everybody works on it, but some of it can be things that need to be conveyed. Some of it might be looking at things like, I know one of our contractors had a significant number of slips and falls on the ice due to the facility that was provided by the school district. So he provided basically these cleats that would go on the grippers that would go on the bottom of everybody's shoes, and he mandated they would be worn on days like yesterday. And that dramatically reduced the number of slips and falls and injuries in their parking lots, and which ultimately helped them reduce their premium over time. So you have to look at these things and continually work at it. So I always sit there and say, when you choose your agent, you want to make sure that they're going to help you improve things, to help you better control your risks and your rates. Understand what their background is, their experience. And just so you understand, there's quite a number of agents that are involved with Keystone that are certified WorkComp advisors. That's the Institute of WorkComp Professionals I instruct for. There's quite a number of them in Keystone that can help you out with this. But you want to understand their background, their years of experience, and so forth. Just because somebody's got gray hair doesn't necessarily mean that they have a lot of experience. You want to get their bios and backgrounds on them just to make sure they really understand what they're going to do for you. But ultimately, here's my suggestion. Would any of you buy a vehicle without going for a test drive? Probably not. So my suggestion is take an agent for a test drive before you engage with them. And that test drive might be a little different in the sense that I would recommend you bring them in, have them conduct an assessment of your operation, come back with a business plan as to how they feel they could help you be better. And if that plan makes sense, then it's probably a better partner for you when it comes to managing your workers' compensation insurance. Because if they can't really identify, analyze, and come back with a better plan, in reality, all they're going to do is try to give you a quote. So by doing that test drive, you get away from the ones that just talk a good game and are not going to deliver, and you find out the ones that are going to be able to actually deliver for you. So if you want additional questions or answers, you can get Hiring a Broker. That is on my website. You download it, and you could use it whenever you're interviewing an agent. So a couple things. Like I said, risk management is really the focus on getting your costs down. But ultimately, make sure you know who to work with and when is the appropriate time to market your insurance. We're going to jump over to managing claims now, because this is kind of how I look at it when I talk to most employers as to how things occur. It's sort of like, when the scarecrow pops up and sticks his arms and points each direction they want that way. There's a lot of hands that are in workers' compensation insurance. First off, the insurance companies, you'll notice a lot of them will say the date of injury on their loss runs as well as the date that the injury is reported. Insurance companies track the delay from the time the injury occurs to it's reported because of this statistics. The longer it takes to report an injury, the more it's going to cost. You also notice there's a bump on day zero. Those are your catastrophes, fatalities and things like that somebody reports immediately. But if you could think about it in your past, you probably had somebody reported an injury late, in which case, by the time you try to get control of it, it ends up becoming, more difficult to deal with. And a lot of times, if it's a questionable injury, you may not be able to go back and do a really good accident investigation to figure out what exactly did occur, because nobody has a good recall of it. So ultimately, there's also what we call the red flags. Things that you sit there and say, this doesn't seem right. Now, there's a whole bunch on here, late reporting, the claimant, your employee is physically active outside of it, the medical evaluations contradict the initial evaluation, things like that. Just because there's a red flag doesn't mean it's a fake or fraudulent injury. But you start getting more of these. If you have multiple checks on this list, then, it might be something you want to bring up to the attention of your adjuster so that they can take some different actions. So that's kind of what the report looks like. You're welcome to download that off of our website as well. So we talked about there's really not a lot of fake injuries, meaning the injury didn't occur. The issue that we run into is the injury as bad as what they're saying it is, or did it occur on the job? Due to the changes in the medical industry where, some people are not able to afford health insurance, or they are on a high deductible program because the employer is keeping the cost down, we're seeing a lot of employees attempting to turn in workers' compensation, or their personal injury as a workers' compensation injury. But ultimately, the thing that drives the results of an injury is really the relationship between the employee and their supervisor. If it's a good relationship, things usually go smoothly. If it's a bad relationship, it usually goes poorly. And one of the other things to keep in mind is if your supervisor is caring, keeps up with the employee and keeps tabs on the employee while they're off, encouraging them to come back, you'll get a better outcome. Believe it or not, I read a study once where 70% of employees from the time they were injured and went off of their work and then returned to work, the only communication they had was with the insurance company or the HR person. They never had conversations with their supervisor, coworkers, things like that. So when somebody's sitting at home and they're not hearing from anybody, do they start feeling like, does anybody really care about me? Do they start feeling like they're a victim? Do they start seeing the attorneys on television say, maybe I should get one of those?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to look at these and continue to say, hey, you're a valued member of our team. We'd like to get you back. And the one thing I want to point out here, non-educated employee, the Department of Labor in Pennsylvania, when you report an injury, you have to report the Social Security number of the employee. That Social Security number gets tracked, and the Department of Labor knows if somebody's had a previous claim. They once told me that 90% of claims in any given year are by somebody that's never had a workers' compensation claim filed before. So do the employees really understand the process that they're going to have to go through? Do they understand, what happens when they get a bill? Do they understand that they need to go on the panel of physicians? Do they understand all of these things? Or you just send them to the doctor and, hope for the best? So educating employees as to the process of the claim is important. But ultimately, the key is, and the reason why we see most poor outcomes is by allowing the employee to take control of the situation. And simply for the biggest way that an employee takes control of it is by being able to stay at home. When the employee's at home, they're in control. If they're coming into work, doing something for you, you're in control. So, interestingly enough, we'll do a quick pop quiz since we're in the education world. What percentage of injuries require an employee to be off of work more than 3 days due to a managed care study? The statistic is that 24% nationally have 3 or more days. In reality, it should be 10%, according to the study. The other one is an interesting statistic. How long does an employee have to be off of work? Because the general data shows the longer the employee's off of work, the less likely they are ever to return to work. How long do they have to be off of work before you think you could flip a coin, a 50-50 shot that they'll ever return? Believe it or not, it's actually just 12 weeks. So at 24 weeks, it's down to 20%. So it's important to understand that you want to have your panels of physicians, but the question is, do you have the right doctors on the panels? How are they being chosen? Are they chosen for fees? Or are they being chosen for quality? Are they bringing the employees back to work? And importantly, you want to have doctors on the panel that understand and treat workers' compensation. My favorite line is, a lot of people may know the doctors on their panel, but the question I have is, does the doctor know you? Because if they don't understand what you do, then they're less likely to send somebody back to work. So in reality, here are the 3 most influential people that affect the workers' compensation claim. You have the doctor who could follow best practices, understand that all the medical evidence says that an employee that heals faster and better while being at work due to the social aspects than sitting at home, or the doctor could send somebody home. You can have the employer who shows that they're caring about their employee, bring the employee back to work on a transitional duty, or lets them sit at home. Or you can have the employee that follows their medical care, comes into work, or they become disruptive, try to stay home, and don't follow their care. So who's missing from this picture? Well, it's really the adjuster. The problem is the adjuster, I contend, can only clean up after the actions of the other 3. If everybody makes the right decisions, the job of the adjuster is very easy. But if somebody in this triangle doesn't do what they're supposed to do, then the adjuster has to try to clean up some sort of mess. So ultimately, the solution is to actually have, instead of having chaos, is to have a established process for bringing somebody back to work, knowing who the doctors are, having job descriptions, having the clinics, reporting injuries right away, and basically bringing somebody back on the job or for transitional duty. And you should even really have this in writing. There's a lot of benefits to having it in writing. In addition to, insurance companies like to see these things in writing. You also want to make sure the employees understand it and sign off on it. If you can show that, that also helps the insurance companies give you better rates. And it also helps the employee understand the entire process so that they know they're going to get taken care of medically, financially, as best as they can under the law, and not have to worry about these things. So they're less likely to get an attorney. It also reduces, like I said, a lot of stress relating to it. And most importantly, the lack of dependency that they feel whenever they're sitting at home. But ultimately, it saves the employer money. Like we talked about before, for every dollar the insurance company spends, it increases your modifier, increases your premium. The second thing is, if under loss runs, they could see how much is paid in medical and how much is paid in wages. Right now, industry average is 60% of a workers' compensation claims are medical bills, 40% are wages. If they see, if you're as an employer, 60, 70, 80% of the claim costs are wages, they're going to say, wait a minute, we have an employer here that's not going to help us with return to work, that transitional duty, which is going to allow the claims to become bigger, so they're going to charge a higher rate. So it does have an effect on how attractive you are to insurance companies. You can pay regular wage or reduced wage because workers' compensation makes up the difference. You could have them come in for a day or, an hour or two, a couple days a week, something so that they're not sitting at home. Ultimately, it shows your care. And then what you want to do is kind of have a job bank of things that they can do, whether it be answering the phones, be a bus monitor if they can't drive, maybe some light cleaning, things like that. Worst case, we've even had to send employees to the Goodwill or the library to do some work. Yes, they're your employee. You can direct them to where they want to work. But ultimately, the key is nobody sits at home. You want to make sure you know who your panels of physicians are. And the one thing I want you to take away on this is having a true acts investigation program. When I talk to attorneys when they are trying to defend an employer when they go to court, they pretty much tell me the most detailed and most complete acts investigation report that they really should have doesn't happen until the attorney's involved. Because a lot of times the employer just completes the first report of injury and doesn't actually dig in and understand, who are the witnesses, getting witness statements, understanding the root cause. Because if you get all that information and your employee's story starts changing over time, the migrating injury, the migrating or changing story, if you ever end up in court, by having documentation, the employee's written statement, the doctors, maybe your safety committee reviews and interviews the employee, and if all these stories start changing, you have this documentation, basically you can impugn the integrity of the employee and win in court most likely. So, and once again, we talked about for your experience modifier, make sure your claim reserves are fair. I know talking to adjusters, they dread the phone calls where they get yelled at and screamed by somebody saying, lower these reserves, you're increasing your mod. You want to make sure they're fair. Understand how much longer the employee's going to have to seek treatment, and does it make sense? Did the diagnosis change? Maybe they're recovering faster and therefore the reserves can go down. Or, maybe the prognosis is not that good and unfortunately the reserves are going to have to stay where they're at. But understanding that, because ultimately poor claims handling will cost you a lot of money. How are we doing time-wise for you, Mike?
We're doing fine. I mean, I
Okay.
owe you a few minutes.
Okay. I just want to make sure. So we're going to dig into the last section is under what we're going to talk about, safety and hiring and culture. Interestingly enough, the most cited OSHA violations come from paperwork. I just flabbergasted. 80% of their fines actually come from not having paperwork. Just as a reminder to everybody, if you have 20 or more employees, by March 2nd, which is next Saturday, you're required to upload your OSHA 300A summary to OSHA. If you need help, just let us know. We'll walk you through it. So here's the question. Where do most injuries come from? The terrible, unsafe environments that you put your employees in, or the acts that they do? Of course, everybody knows it is the acts that your employees, or the actions of your employees. I like to know why these people were in hazmat and this guy's just standing there smiling. And yes, that is a bomb.
Oh my gosh.
And you think these are bad? I've actually had injuries reported where they lift an employee up in a skid loader to do a light bulb, and the skid loader had bad hydraulics, and the thing collapsed, and the employee was severely injured. So don't think these are all foreign. We see some crazy stuff here too. Okay, so DuPont did a study of over 40,000 work-related injuries. Less than 1% were the accidents. They said 18 were unsafe conditions, 80% were unsafe acts, but they also went on to say that most of the unsafe conditions could have been avoided had an employee addressed it ahead of time. So where are your loss prevention, your safety preventions focused? It really needs to be a culture, top to bottom, that prevents injuries. Most safety programs are where somebody's telling them, you got to do this, you got to be safe, you got to wear your protective equipment, whatever. When you start getting a good safety culture, if that employee's not doing it, a coworker saying, hey, you might not want to do that, or hey, you might want to put your grippers on your shoes so you don't fall out in the parking lot, things like that. So it does help you with a lot of other things, but ultimately having a robust safety program not only reduces injuries, but ultimately will reduce your insurance costs. Like I said, training of your employees, focusing on the behavior of employees really is the key to preventing injuries. My friend Gary Gillespie has done so many classes for the members over the years on defensive driving. Those are the things that employees need to see and understand, because even though they're trying to be safe behind the wheel, I'll give you an example. I was traveling from one side of Pittsburgh to the other. There's an area near Frick Park that's a windy road that I was on. As I'm starting to drive and I'm going around a bend, I see an SUV coming my direction, and his wheels started hitting the double yellow line, and they continued to cross. So I looked at the driver's eyes. His eyes were focused on his phone. So I proceeded to go. There was a big enough opening. I literally pulled over into the bike lane and then the parking side and avoided him hitting me. And then I proceeded to stop and called 911 because he hit the guy behind me head on, airbags deployed. So me paying attention, I was able to avoid that accident. And those are some of the things that, can be done. But once again, that accident investigation program is very important. So final takeaways. Your premium is based on your risk profile. You want to make sure you look attractive to your insurance companies so that you can earn better rates. Getting quotes will only get you so far. You want to make sure you have good doctors on your panels that will bring your employee back to work, but also getting the right medical care as quickly as possible, getting the right diagnosis is going to reduce the cost of that claim long term as well. So, whoops. Why is that flipping all over on me? There we go. And like I said, trying to create a zero lost time, zero injury culture is ultimately the best thing to do. So with that, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right. Anybody have any questions for David? I think you left them all speechless. I don't have any questions on here. I know usually when we do this, particularly on this issue, a lot of times the questions come after they get off the phone, and they start thinking about, so I know you've given them your contact information. I believe, flip right? That.
Yep. Actually, it's actually I got 2 emails already.
There you go.
Asking for some information.
Yep, So this is what usually happens, and that's okay.
But no, it's okay. Yeah, they're looking for some of the stuff I had on the website. I'll send the links and so forth. But
Awesome.
No, this is something we crammed what I normally, this is something when I do for employers, a little bit more in depth, a little bit more detailed, pretty much is a 3 to 3.5 hour workshop that we put on for employers. But I'm trying to give everybody the high level view as to, it's not just about here's your policy, here's your premium. There's other things that go into and affect your costs. And we can do webinars on, there we go. A lot of these different segments. I mean, we can do one just on how to set up and make sure you have the right doctors in your panels. Keystone Risk, the risk management division of Keystone has Stacy Cheese, who is very good with claims. She's done webinars, and maybe should do one for you guys as well on just understanding the claims process in more detail and choosing the doctors that are on panels. We've done workshops on understanding business culture, even behavior-based safety. So any of these things you want, we can dig into more detail at any point if you'd want us to do so.
We should talk about that, David, offline. Definitely.
Yes.
As we look toward next year, toward later this year.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, excellent. Well, David, I want to thank you, as always. Another great presentation. Obviously, people are already reaching out to you. If anyone has any, needs any more information, obviously you see David's info. Feel free. We'll have that on our files as well. We're happy to help refer people over to David. So again, thank you. Lori Simpson had to duck out early a little bit for another meeting. And we always appreciate the fact that Keystone has connected us with you, David. And I know our members have found you been really helpful to them. So we're going to...
And as I say, I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. I'll be able to make the conference in June, so I'll be there if anybody has additional questions, or if somebody cancels on you, I'd be happy to step in.
Always. Absolutely. Always. So, all right, David, again, thank you so much. Everybody, have yourselves a great day. Stay safe, and look toward our website for future webinars that'll be coming up. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again, David.
No, you're welcome. Bye-bye.